Okay, I've got water-based resist here. You can see creamy color, not so much. It's separated. I'm going to have to shake the hell out of this before I can use it. Okay, you get a cute little bottle. That's what comes with the various kits. It has a tip on it, but it's a pretty broad one. You pull it out, and that way you open the bottle so that you can get your resist in. It is thick, gloppy stuff. And if at all possible, you want to just squeeze it right into the middle of things. Once you start getting it around that section, it does, the bubble effect that we get, and then it's really hard to get more in there because it keeps sticking and bubbling and what have you. But there you go, all full. That one. And then some sort of tip, right? This one happens to be 0.7 millimeter. They have 5 and 9 and all kinds of other things. These are actually meant to screw on to some of the different bottles, not this particular one necessarily, but you can kind of push, give it a little twist, and there we go. Nice and ready for what we need to do. All right. So this hanky, I'd already used some leftover dye, give it a nice blue color. Wherever I put this, the dye won't go, so I'll have this blue left on my lines, whatever. You can trace your designs with a pencil if you want. Pencil's kind of iffy sometimes. I've got this stuff, General Sketch and Wash, water-soluble graphite pencil, so I know it's going to come out in the wash, but what have you. A lot of artists, will just kind of pin their design underneath and then trace their lines. If you do that, you want to put your paper in a clear bag, because otherwise the Gouda is going to go through your silk and stick to your paper, right? And then you have a real mess. There it is. Traditionally, silk is stretched. So I have my very fancy setup. Let me slide a bit so you can see here, right? I'm taped to a couple of bins. If you're doing a big one, chairs are good. But this is a good height so that you guys can see what's going on. All right, I keep a paper towel handy. Sometimes, you get a bubble. I definitely squeeze to get a little started and make sure I'm not going to get a bubble that way. And then you just draw over your lines. Pardon my shaking hands, but here we go. The goal, of course, is to squeeze a nice, even line. But with that whole shaky thing also gives me variable width, so I just kind of even out as much as I can and keep going. It's a beautiful bead right there. Right, that short section. Okay, now this has to dry completely before you can do any of the painting on it. You want to immediately clean the tip and the tip of the bottle. Just drop those in hot water for right now. So I've pulled both off. I'm going to put the cap on. That'll keep that from drying out, and the other part will go in water so it doesn't get dry and clogged. Right. There's my resist, all nice and dried. It's a little crunchy, so if I were to crumple this up now, it would put cracks in my lines, which would allow dye to go in there. Could be a neat effect if that's what I wanted. It's not what I'm going for at this point, but hey, here we go. And I have some cyan and magenta that I have watered down because I want to start pale and move it up from there. Yeah, you can wear gloves or not. Your hands will be colored for a couple of days if you don't wear gloves, which happens to me all the time. I know we all remember wicking, right? The liquid moving along the length of a fiber. So when you're doing this, the dye wicks along the silk. So you don't want to paint right up next to your resist lines with a really wet brush, because that will just allow the color to go under and over and all those other kinds of things you don't want. So as my brush gets drier, I move a little closer. Now, if this was sitting on a surface, right, on a piece of plastic, on a piece of freezer paper, what have you, it would help the fibers to wick more, right? We've all spilled liquid on a table and it goes whoosh, right? So if your silk is touching something, even if it's something like brown paper, that will help the color to move past your resist lines. Ooh, getting close there. Careful, careful. Because otherwise, of course, you know that that little bit would roll off of the resist into where I don't want it, and that's the way life goes, right? Okay, so you can see here how much it's lightened up. It's got dry, right? As I said when I started, I watered these down. If I remember correctly, I did 1 part dye, 3 parts water, or something very close to that. I wanted the pale watercolor, thin kind of a look to start with, to go with my background. I know I'm going to build it up some more, which is another good reason to have it thin down. If I start with pure dye, right, straight dye, then you can't make the color any deeper. Like laying more layers of dye on top does not give you a better color like it does for paint. All of that extra dye will just wash out in the end of things. And I could start doing something on the background now as well, but I think what I want to do is get this a little more the way I'm thinking, and then I'll do a little more on the background. You can do it all at once. You just want to make sure that you are not getting your resist all wet so that it goes away, because then you'll be really pissed. And yes, I'm cross-contaminating my little containers, but that's kind of why I have them in little containers. I don't get the whole bottle of dye contaminated, just my little containers. And you can see how much more it wicks once it's already got a layer of color on it. something else to keep in mind while you're working. There's something I didn't mention. Just like in watercolor, if you don't keep a wet edge, you'll get dry marks. You can see right here, I've got this little bit of a curve. If I just let that dry right now, I am going to see a little bit of that line there. And if I bring in my wet stuff and get to it before it dries, that will take out the line. And kind of work it a bit with your brush. Do just a dab of water, and I do mean a dab. I'm doing some mixing on the silk. A lot of people wouldn't do it this way. This is left over from my oil painting days, I think. I just really like being able to blend on my canvas, on my surface. I like the painterly effects that I get. But it also means that I risk making an unholy mess. You have to be willing to work with whatever shows up. Here's where I'm going to play a little bit with what you can do, be wet, etc. Straight water. My magenta. This is still the watered down one, right? I'm not putting pure dye on. More water on top. To make it bleed. And you see the water has come all the way over to where my resist is right here. So now I want to make sure I don't get any more water here so that it doesn't start to wet my design and wick it into my background. Wick it. And I've wet more of this than I need to because I don't want that dry edge. And the color that I already had on this handkerchief had not been set. Right? So if I kept working with it, that pale background could start to come up because I hadn't set it yet. something like that. Now, again, I'm doing a little water, just enough to get me to the edge of the resist so that I won't have a hard line. You can see a little bit here how the old blue underneath is reacting a bit since it wasn't set. A little bit over here. I really like what that one's doing there. I took my watered down cyan and I watered it down even further. Just want a kiss of more of that color, and then I'm going to come in with a little more of the magenta. Okay, we're gonna let it dry and see what we think when it's dry. Okay, it's dry. I like it. Now it's time to set the color and wash the resist out. So, you've got this lovely dye set, right, that comes with it. It's concentrated, so you only need a little bit. I normally do like a capful wherever we're going. Since I'm just doing this right now, I'm just gonna do a little, that much. Yeah, I know, highly sophisticated measuring. All right, now here's the thing to know about this particular dye set. It works as soon as it touches the fabric. So obviously I can't just, plunk it down. If I've got it folded or crumpled or whatever it is, it goes in, the dye gets wet next to each other, transfers, and sets immediately, right? So if I don't want my colors to be transferred onto each other, I've got to make sure that I kind of swoosh it through. I know, technical terms. Here we go. Ready? One, set. Okay, that's it. My dyes are set now. Now what you see dripping is the excess dye that I've got on there, right? So I'll have to do some washing to get rid of that, but otherwise the color is set. This is cold water for the dye set. I'm going to take it to the sink with the warm water so that I can get the resist out. But otherwise, there's the pretty project all done. Okay, so here it is. My resist is washed out. How can I tell? There's no crunchies, right? All of that texture is gone now. You just feel the silk. Wet silk, but still silk. So you can see the lines where it was. Now I started with a light blue, right? My fabric was pretty light when I put my resist on top. So I don't have bright white lines. If you start with a white project and draw your resist on that, you will have bright white lines, right? There you go. So here it is, all nice and ready to dry and to then, delicately dab your sweaty forehead in the summertime, right? Yeah.